My name's Zach Wienersmith. I do a comic called Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal. That's nice. Yeah, I'm not really into it. I'm more into Penny Arcade. Well, thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I'm going to shortly turn you over to the more capable hands of all of our team. But I just wanted to say one quick, slightly serious thing at the beginning of the show, which I said last year, is that just so you know, we are not attempting to make fun of any particular field. They tend to do that to themselves just fine. Plus, nobody on my team is the least bit subtle, so it would have been really obvious if we were trying to do that. We actually hope that you learn nothing tonight. We're not opposed to learning. We like learning, but that's not why we're here. We're here to laugh at really, really terrible theories of science and all their great substantiation. And also, if you do learn something here, there's a pretty good chance you had some perfectly good learning that's going to get overridden by what you learned tonight. So thank you all so much for having us. It means so much to us that there's this many nerds for the dorkiest show in the world. And with that, I turn you over to our illustrious MC, Mr. Ben Lilly, Dr. Ben Lilly.
Give it up again for Zach Wienersmith. I love that so many people come out for a night of utterly ridiculous things about science. Only here in Cambridge would that happen, so give yourselves a hand for living in this city. One very quick housekeeping note. You are welcome to keep your phones on, although put them in vibrate, and if you do tweet or take photos, which you're welcome to do without flashes, tweet under the hashtag BAFest, which I'm sure you would have guessed anyway, because that's the only obvious one. But yes, please go ahead and do that. I live in New York City, and here's my plug for my thing. I'm the director of the Story Collider, where we have people tell true personal stories about science. I have 5 fans in this audience. That's awesome. Thank you all for coming out. So do check us out at storycollider.org. But so I do that out of New York, but I come up to Boston a lot. I like Boston. I'm from New York, so I use the word Boston to mean Cambridge. But I always feel, when I get here, I feel very much at home, which I think means that for me, home feels like college. Because this really is the land of perpetual undergrad and grad school and postdoc and second postdoc and freaking out and then maybe a tenure track. The life cycle of the academic. But I was wandering around today and I was thinking about, looking at all the buildings, and it made me think about spandrels. How many of you know what a spandrel is? Is that everyone who studies evolution, or everyone? I heard yeses and nos. Anyway, you were probably like me and geeked out about Stephen Jay Gould when you were a kid, which is why you ended up here. But so spandrels are an evolutionary thing that looks like it has a purpose, but actually evolved just because of some structural constraints of other things that are actually adaptive. And I realized something as I'm looking at these buildings, these institutions of learning and research, which is that Boston attracts nerds. And of course, it does that because of its very cold and damp climate and lack of sunlight. And as you know, when nerds burrow, they create spaces where they hope to attract mates. And for nerds to attract mates, of course, requires gifts of books. And so these nerd communities that in the distant past were attracted to the cold, damp climate of Cambridge needed to build large rooms full of books, which are libraries. And as you know, a good library needs sustenance from both grant funding and tuition. And so it occurred to me that the entire edifice of learning and research that is the Cambridge-Boston area is basically a spandrel so that nerds can find mates. And I have to say, you've all constructed this very successfully, so congratulations on that. This is an example of a bad ad hoc hypothesis. You will hear better ones tonight. There's going to be 7 of them, 1 keynote. And then after the keynote will be the 6 main presentations. And we really want to maintain a verisimilitude of science tonight. And because of that, this is the really important part. There's going to be charts and graphs and everything looks sciencey. But the really important bit about science, and I think you all know this, the most important thing about science, the real goal of science, why you all got into it, is so that you can prove objectively that you're better than your peers. Now, normally that's done with citation counts, but we don't have time to let those accumulate. So tonight we are going to have a panel of 4 judges who you will meet after the keynote, but they will be judging each of the talks on 4 criteria that Zach and the team felt best illustrated what it means to be a bad ad hoc hypothesis. They are the force of science, basically how well they punched us in the face with charts, graphs, and citations. The artistry, how unexpected and clever the idea is. The parsimony, how well did they get it across without too much I didn't do that on purpose. Without too much obfuscatory language. There we go. And finally, the strength of the defense. They will be asked questions by the judges. How well do they hold up against that? This is what Zach calls the FAPS system. Yeah, about the same as last year. And okay, so speaking of last year, you all know that there is a prize for this. The winner receives the illustrious 3D printed image of Darwin looking dubious. For those of you who can't see, which is everybody, it says, the winner of BAFest East 2014, the Festival of Bad Ad Hoc Hypotheses, and it's Darwin saying, I guess so. But, okay, so we have this wonderful printed prize, but this year, in an expansion, there is, in addition, I already said that, in addition to this prize, I want you to know what a great 3D printed prize this is. In addition to that, there is a cash prize. And here to show you the cash prize, Zach Weinersmith. In the traditional cash prize briefcase, there it is. That is, in fact, $500 that will go to the winner of tonight. And also, they will be getting an SMBC book, Science Ruining Everything Since 1543. I should know that. I own this book. Also, 2 books of Sufficiently Remarkable by the wonderful science comic Maki Naro, who draws Sufficiently Remarkable, and also Box Plot, science-themed comics on popular science. So go check him out. The amazing prizes for this year's winner. Thank you, Zach. Let's leave this there so that they can all look at it as they give their presentation and dream of glory. All right, so before we get to the very amazing judgy bit, we are going to have the very amazing first presentation by our keynote speaker, who is one of the team behind the comic and animation series Cyanide and Happiness, a very dark, you know what? I had a whole description of Cyanide and Happiness here, but clearly I don't need it. It's an amazing thing online. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. Please welcome our keynote speaker, Rob Den Blecker.
Hi, I'm from the internet. And I'm here to talk to you guys tonight about science. Specifically, I'm here to answer a scientific mystery that's been bothering me literally all week. Why did humans evolve long hair on their heads? And that's the question I'm going to answer for you tonight. But before I get to that, you're probably wondering why the guy who draws butt jokes on the internet is teaching science to a bunch of MIT students. So before I get into my theory, I want to give you a brief background on my own, I guess, humble scientific achievements. Last year, I solved world hunger with my exponential Oreo theory. And it goes basically like this. The first Oreo was introduced in 1912. The double stuff Oreo, you can see where I'm going. The double stuff Oreo was introduced in 1976, and the mega stuff Oreo came out in 2013, each time doubling the amount of stuffing. So when I graphed the doubling of the stuffing against the decreasing time interval between stuff doubling, I was able to determine that on February 8th, 2079, a single Oreo will be 1 mile thick and contain 12 million calories. On a more troubling note, I also learned that 9 days later, a single Oreo will exceed the width of the universe. And no one knows what will happen then, but I bet it'll be delicious. But I'm not here to talk about cookies or breaking the universe. I'm here to talk about hair. Why did humans evolve long hair on their heads? Now, like the current theory, I guess, by scientists or whatever, is that long hair is the result of sexual selection. In other words, potential mates found long hair attractive. And to that, I offer this counter-argument. I think I have a much stronger, much simpler theory. Let's look at 3 facts. Humans are the only animal on Earth that can choose their hair length. Human hair is greasier than that of most land mammals. This is why you have bad hair days, but your dog doesn't. And third, early humans populated almost every ecosystem on Earth, each one full of unique predators and dangers. So these 3 facts led me to one fairly obvious conclusion, which is that humans evolved long hair so they could style it into animal shapes to scare off predators. This phenomenon is actually well known in nature already, and it's called mimicry. Mimicry is basically when one animal resembles another in order to scare predators, to frighten away potential bad guys. And I propose that early humans adaptively styled their hair as they spread around the world in order to deal with different predators and different ecosystems. For example, a prairie or woodland-dwelling tribe might prefer the beehive, whereas like a coastal community might prefer something more like this. Yeah, so that's my theory. Let's discuss evidence. First of all, there's modern evidence, modern observational evidence. When we go outside, we see intimidating hairstyles everywhere. Spiked hair, mohawks, bald people. There's a positive correlation between scary hairstyles and being part of a rough crowd. But anecdotal evidence isn't enough. We need hard evidence. We need geography. We need artifacts. We need genetics. So to start with, if my theory is true, we'd expect one thing. We would expect that as humans spread further out of Africa and populated the planet, they would encounter more and more diverse predators as they went. We would expect that hair length should increase in order for humans to create more complex animals and shapes. And this has been found to be true, according to this slightly racist Darwin quote that I found. There is an extraordinary difference in the length of hair in the different races. In the Negro, the hair forms a mere curly mat. With us, meaning Anglo-Saxon in his case, it is of great length. And with the American natives, it not rarely reaches the ground. I wasn't able to find any data beyond this quote, but I figure, I mean, he's Darwin. I figure we can trust him on these kinds of things. Something else we'd expect to find is evidence of hairstyling tools. You would expect to see sharp objects in the same places that humans settled, and we find these in abundance. And lastly, as we all know, styling hair requires water. And sure enough, every civilization that we know of has begun near a water source. So, in conclusion, I believe that every piece of evidence that I've chosen to include points to my theory being absolutely true. Humans evolved long hair to fake out predators. But here's something interesting. If this theory is true, and it is, would it work the other way? Could we mimic friendly animals to gain the trust of other people, mimic safer animals? And the answer to that is yes. And I've proven that tonight, actually, by experimenting on all of you. I've actually convinced an entire room of MIT students to take me seriously simply by mimicking the hairstyle of the most trustworthy creature on Earth, Hugh Grant. And none of you realized it was happening. And that's why science is amazing. And I hope you guys really soak in all the talks you're going to hear tonight, because you're going to hear a lot of really great theories, all of them true. So thank you very much.
Rubden Blaker, everybody. All right, so we are bringing up the presentations. Our performers are getting very nervous. I'm sorry for saying that, guys. It's time to meet our judges, the people who will be evaluating the Bad Ad Hoc Hypotheses. So first, our returning judge, Robin Abrams. She's a writer with a PhD in psychology. She writes the popular Misconduct advice column in the Boston Globe and is the author of the book Misconduct, Mind Over Manners. Please welcome Robin Abrams. Second is Dr. Dante Shepard. He is an assistant academic professor of chemical engineering at Northeastern University. Northeastern is here and there, conducting engineering education research into producing STEM modules and curricula for K-12 classrooms based on graduate level research. That is amazing. Dr. Dante Shepard. I'm sorry, he's also the creator of the webcomics Surviving the World and the webcomic PhD Unknown, and you should check those both out. Our third judge, Dr. Hopi Hoekstra, is an evolutionary geneticist in the Department of Organismic and Evolutionary Biology and the Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology at Harvard University. She's also an investigator at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute and the curator of mammals at the Museum of Comparative Zoology, Dr. Hopi Hoekstra. Finally, we have Tomer Ullman. He is a graduate student in the Computational Cognitive Science group at MIT, where he studies module... Let's try that again. The Cognitive Science group at MIT... There we go. Where he studies models of high-level cognition and development. Oh yeah, he was last year's winner of BAFest. So a big welcome to our judges. And now, if I'm not mistaken, we are ready for our very first presentation of the evening. First up is Emma Cowell. She's a senior at Harvard College studying chemical and physical biology. She is the president of the Harvard Community of Humanists, Atheists, and Agnostics, though lately she spends most of her time in the Church Lab doing research on extracellular vesicles. Please welcome Emma Cowell.
Good evening, everyone. I invite you all to... Yes, I invite you all to yawn. And in doing so, consider the yawn. The yawn is one of the enduring mysteries of human neurophysiology. Study of this phenomenon dates back to antiquity, and yet no consensus has emerged on its adaptive significance. Many hypotheses, once or even currently believed to explain the evolutionary purpose of yawning, are in fact entirely discredited. For example, A common misconception is that yawning reoxygenates the blood. However, there is no change in blood oxygenation post-yawning. The notion that yawning might cool down the brain, though popular of late, is entirely unsubstantiated, and in fact impossible without a concomitant increase in sweating, which is not observed. And finally, despite an isolated study in which patients were found to orgasm after every time they yawned while taking a certain antidepressant, there is no evidence for yawning as a general signal of sexual arousal. Why then do we yawn? The key to this conundrum, to this phylogenetically ancient behavior, can only be found when considering human evolution from a holistic perspective. I propose that if we consider the needs of our hunter-gatherer predecessors on the savannah, the reason why we yawn becomes quite clear. Flying insects, such as mosquitoes, beetles, and locusts, are not only high in protein, but have also been observed to swarm in densities of up to several insects per liter. We propose that these insects served as an alternative protein source for our hunter-gatherer ancestors, with yawning as the primary harvesting mechanism, of which the yawning of contemporary humans remains as a vestigial trait. I think you'll find this scenario is supported by many lines of evidence, from the times and temperatures at which yawning is most frequently observed, to the physical aspects and corollaries of yawning, all the way to its social contagion. So let's dive right in. The anatomy of a yawn is exquisitely tuned to the purpose of gathering insects. Observe. The eyes are tightly shut to prevent injury from stray members of the swarm. The mouth is distended to its widest possible diameter in order to effect maximum insect capture. The tongue is depressed to maximize what we refer to as ICCV, or insect capture cavity volume. And finally, the face is tilted at the optimal angle, which is perpendicular to the insect flight path. So clearly, all the external features of the typical yawn are well suited to gathering insects, but let's probe a little deeper. If we probe into the physiology of a stereotypical yawn, we observe a spike in salivary cortisol levels, a known marker of hunger. We also observe a spike in heart rate, which would have prepared the body for digestion. Both of these effects are in fact also observed in chewing, which is another pre-digestive activity. In the landmark 1994 study, Field Observations of Yawning Activity in Humans, it was discovered that the most common times for yawning are dawn and dusk. Now, this corresponds very well with what common knowledge dictates to be the most common times of insect swarming. But if we transpose these graphs, we can see that the dramatic rise in insect activity at around 6:30 p.m. is followed immediately by a rise in yawning activity. This is no coincidence. This is because these would be the most fruitful hours for gathering protein. This correlation scales readily up to the level of seasons. The optimal temperature range for human yawns is between 19 and 22 degrees Celsius, which is also the optimal temperature range for the breeding sites of many flying insects. Now let's come to one of the thornier problems. As I'm sure you've all experienced, yawning is quite contagious. Often the mere mention of the word yawn can be sufficient to induce yawning in the listener. Why should this be so? Allow me to propose a thought experiment. Here, you have a typical hunter-gatherer family. The average age at which yawning is first observed to be contagious is 6 years old. At 6 years old, the average human is 1 meter tall. This is a stunning fact, as the centroid of an insect swarm, the densest part of the swarm, is also observed to be roughly 1 meter off the ground. Clearly, yawning evolved to be contagious in humans so that a family unit in a pre-agricultural society could coordinate the yawning of every member tall enough to access the swarm's centroid by mouth. This rapid synchronization would have been strongly favored, as insect swarms can move at speeds of up to 4 meters per second, and therefore there would be a very limited window for gathering. We next sought to determine what the prevalence of this feeding strategy could have been for our pre-agricultural ancestors, and using the latest research in insect protein densities and swarming densities, we assigned a p-value to a sweet of common swarming insects. This p-value approximates the protein that would have been available to a yawner after a single yawn of average duration. These are some of our cross-species modeling. A yawn in a swarm of mosquitoes yields a p-factor of 0.6 grams, roughly equivalent to a modern walnut in protein content. If we move up to June bugs, we are able to obtain 1.2 grams of protein per yawn, roughly equivalent to one shrimp. And ladies and gentlemen, a single well-timed yawn in a swarm of locusts can gather a whopping 3 grams of protein, roughly equivalent to one strip of bacon. Now, if you consider that these p-values merely represent a conservative estimate based on the best numbers that we have right now, and that the average human yawns between 4 and 6 times per day, it is not unreasonable to propose that the daily yawn harvest of our ancestors could have been well in excess of 20 grams, meaning that a quarter to a third of the protein consumption was through this mechanism. In light of the overwhelming evidence that I have presented here today, I would like to suggest that our hypothesis, in fact, does more than unravel the millennia-old mystery of the yawn. It also completely overhauls our understanding of the nutritional and metabolic dynamics of hunter-gathering. For this reason, we propose that the model for pre-agricultural feeding strategies be revised to include our discovery and renamed the hunter-gatherer yawner model. Moving forward, our lab is focused on exploring the wide-ranging consequences of this shift, such as its implications for pest control, world hunger, and the recently popular modern interpretations of the paleo diet. Thank you very much.
And McCall, everyone. All right, do our judges have questions?
I have a question. Excellent talk, thank you. I certainly learned something. I was wondering, you did touch upon yawning in certain hours of the day, which I thought was very interesting, but we also seem to yawn when we're bored. Do you think it has something to do with why people don't find insects interesting, or is there some connection there?
Yes, you bring up an interesting point. I think that's a unique insight you have there into the functioning of this mechanism. Perhaps this was it filled a different niche in the hunter-gatherer feeding strategy regime. For example, hunting and gathering are both high-energy activities, but perhaps yawning complemented them as a low-energy activity because it can be done when you're simply sitting or standing around, and therefore when they were bored or tired, it would have been more advantageous. We will explore that further.
What could be then the evolutionary rationale behind the common etiquette practice of covering your mouth when you yawn?
Yes. We've considered this at length in our lab. And I think you'll find that if you widen your view outside of the typical Western societal etiquette of covering your mouth while you yawn, you'll find that similar to other eating practices such as burping after a meal, you have a range of different etiquettes across different societies, and it's simply chance that this evolved to be the one that we in our society condemn. It could easily have been, something else like putting your elbows on the table.
So very interesting talk, and I think there's some interesting implications of your work, as I'm sure you would likely agree. One of the things that I've most frequently noticed is my students yawning in 8 a.m. classes, and based on your explanation, I should take this to mean that they are not tired or sleep deprived or bored, but in fact are asking, based on hunger, to have class outside?
Yes. In fact, I might speak to you afterwards about a future collaboration in which you test that in a controlled environment. You could also see if the yawning is abated by bringing in snacks.
So that was fantastic. You gave us this wonderful explanation about how yawning evolved in the past. I'm wondering if you had any predictions about the future of yawning. Will it eventually go extinct?
I actually think that there might be the potential for a certain resurgence of this ancient behavior. As many of you may know, I think approximately 80% of the world's population today does consume insects, and there are certain initiatives here. There's one group of Harvard students that has a startup that's trying to get people to eat more insects. And seeing that we are facing many looming crises of food shortages it might actually be advantageous for us in the future to re-adopt this practice. I would certainly advocate so.
All right. Thank you, Emma Cowell. All right. Our next speaker is Kevin Yusang Jung. Kevin is a high school senior with interests in cellular regeneration, sunluminescence, and graphic novel making. Please welcome Kevin Yusang Jung.
As No Shave November approaches, we are once again reminded of a trait that makes us unique from other great apes, the ability to grow facial hair. Upon observing the qualities of facial hair, such as it needing energy to grow, the fact that it can increase rates of infection, and the fact that it's extremely unaerodynamic, one could ask, other theories that have been suggested say that beards augment females' perceptions of men's age, social status, and aggressiveness, but not attractiveness. This must indicate the existence of a vital function it must have played for it to have become a universal trait. Our theory, taking that into account, tries to analyze the physical characteristics of beards and how they would have directly aided early man to survive. This led us to the hypothesis that beards were utilized as a mobile cache to store and transport food. This is an artist's depiction of how an early man's beard would have looked like. The following is a comparison of normal straighter hair and curlier beard hair that you would find. Straighter hair has a low surface area to volume ratio thanks to its circular cross-section and thus has very low adhesion. Curly beard hair, however, has a very high surface area to volume ratio as seen by its oblong-shaped cross-section, and it maximizes adhesive capabilities almost like Velcro. This would thus allow for food to be adhered to the beard. The strategic placement of the beard is also imperative to its function. The close proximity that the beard has to the mouth makes easy accessibility of food that would be stuck in the beard. And also maximized field of vision makes verification of presence of food in the beard extremely quick. Next, when we analyzed the movement of the head and beard during running motion, we found out that the resulting shape is virtually identical to a sine function graph with a very low amplitude. The resulting vertical stability would have ensured for food not to be lost during rigorous activities such as skipping, dancing, or running. Now, all these physical traits would have worked together to enable man to use both hands freely and store larger and larger pieces of food, even entire limbs of animals. This would have garnered success for strenuous activities such as combat, or hunting. Now, one may suggest, well, wouldn't this presence of food attract predators? Well, Mother Nature, in all her wisdom, created a biological fail-safe to prevent a faster predator from catching humans due to the presence of food. And this section's about the evasive maneuvers. Human beings, as a biological fail-safe, can perform what is called trichotomy, or casting off of the beard. As anyone with a beard would know, this process does require sufficient motivation and strength. And it is quite painful, as anyone would know. However, as an example of convergent evolution with the green animal, which can cast off its tail to distract predators, male humans, upon casting off their beards, can also regenerate their beards within a matter of weeks. Despite the abundance of such convincing evidence, we decided to test out the true degree to which beards could enhance performance in daily activities. Male students from an age group of 17 to 18 were divided into two smaller groups, Group A with beards and Group B without beards. Having fasted for 6 hours prior to the task, they were instructed to run 1,600 meters as fast as possible. And to simulate the presence of food in their beard, the bearded students had a high energy content paste applied to their beards. And for anyone who is sensitive to things that are of graphic nature, you should turn around right now. The following clip is a demonstration of the application process of the high energy content paste. The paste in our case was hazelnut spread, more commonly known as Nutella. And as we conducted this experiment, the results were astonishing. The students that had nothing to eat in their beards, the students that had no beards, failed the task miserably, with a negligible number of students passing out towards the end of the run. But bearded students, despite receiving no instructions whatsoever on what to do with this hazelnut spread, these bearded students instinctively utilized advanced tongue manipulation techniques to consume this and derive a high energy boost, completing the task swiftly and majestically. Thus infallibly proving the immense evolutionary benefit of the beard as a mobile food cache. Now, as human beings became less nomadic and the need for modern organic food preservation methods decreased, we can see that in modern society, beards are not as popular as they once were, which is sort of disappointing for some people. But as there are more and more signs hinting the fall of civilization, such as epidemics, climate change, or economic crises that specifically threaten modern food preservation methods, there have been an increasing number of people that have been growing out their beards, called hipsters by some. So as you return to your daily lives and you happen to come across one of these individuals and you're filled with feelings of disgust or revulsion, try to appreciate their beards instead. That's harking in a new era of beard power. Because eventually, it might grow on you.
Kevin Yusang Jung.
I would just like to acknowledge Brandon Harris for providing me with his awesome beard picture, Randy Latini for helping me practice my speech, and Ed Mulligan, our school custodian, who applied me with the spoon with which I spread the Nutella. And Sean Scannell, Justin O'Donnell, and Katie Carr, and the anonymous participants of the Hazelnut Paste Run, who made the experiment possible.
All right, are there questions? Dante.
That was a fascinating talk. I guess I'm curious, while this may not be a true beard, I wonder if your research has also discovered the origin of the term mutton chops.
Taking into account the fact that facial hair isn't the only inexplicable patch of hair that we have, including back hair and hair on our palms, We predict that to benefit and suit different environments, such as people who would catch fish and swim to store food on their backs instead of their faces. Mutton chops would be a simple variation of the beard as a method of preserving and storing and transporting food.
Robin?
Simply going to ask, if beards are primarily a sort of adaptation to help deal with extremely harsh conditions, does this explain why men are more likely to have beards in the darkest timeline?
As I mentioned in the last slide, we are expecting that with the rise of foreboding signs of apocalypse, such as epidemics and financial crises, there will be a resurgence of beards, men growing out their beards as a subconscious response.
I noticed that you're clean shaven.
And to that, I have a very, very satisfactory explanation as to why I'm completely clean-shaven today. If you analyze the beard attraction levels in single ethnicity societies, South Korea, for example, there's a correlation between negative correlation between the attractiveness of beards and the presence of refrigerator industries. I am ethnically South Korean, and South Korea is known for its extensive refrigerator lines, such as LG refrigerators and Samsung refrigerators. Thus, it would be unnecessary for me to grow out a beard, as we have the technology necessary to store our food.
Interesting.
So your hypothesis may predict that women may also benefit from beards. Do you have an explanation for that?
Well, the studies conducted prove that women aren't necessarily attracted to beards, but simply from the presence of a luscious flank of zebra would have probably attracted a female, and especially with the impending doom that we are expecting, women will once again, against their wishes, be attracted to the mere presence of food, especially hazelnut spread.
And why then don't women have beards?
Well, because beards are a simple byproduct of testosterone, and because women generally do not produce as much testosterone as men, that's why we think women don't have as much beards, even though they would benefit from them. However, from seeing the immense popularity that bearded ladies have been gathering as singers, we presume that these few individual women who do have beards probably served a significant role in ancient history, such as Queen Nefertiti of ancient Egypt, who is depicted in ancient Egyptian art with a beard.
All right, thank you so very much, Kevin Yu Sing Jung. All right, our next speaker is Dr. Barbara Vrede. She is an evolutionary developmental biologist with a master's from Leiden University in the Netherlands. She did her PhD research at the Gulbenkian Institute of Science in Portugal. I'm sorry I got that wrong. And now works as a postdoc at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel. Dr. Barbara Vrede.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present my work on the adaptive dynamics behind the use of alternative medicine. As an evolutionary biologist, I was absolutely puzzled by the continuing and, in fact, increasing popularity of alternative medicine. This is data collected from individuals in the United States, showing the increasing popularity of alternative medicine use. Alternative medicine, of course, defined by Tim Minchin famously as medicine that has either not been proved to work or been proved not to work. And if we assume that before there was any evidence-based medicine, all medicine was alternative medicine, according to this definition, and we then fit a curve to that data, we see that the point at which the expected decrease stops and in fact reverses, correlates quite nicely with the increasing availability of vaccines as well as antibiotics. And herein, I think, lies the solution to this problem. I propose here that alternative medicine is stimulated by bacteria and viruses. Our pathogens have evolved to protect themselves to this very real danger of increasing medical advance by being able to detect and respond to the use of alternative medicine and in fact manipulates their hosts into using this. This is a very adaptive phenotype, and the following thought experiment will demonstrate that. If we look at a normal infection, after the primary infection, the bacterium grows, increases in population size inside their host until it finds a new one. However, if this, with the increase of population size, of course, increases the chance that the infection is detected by the host, who can then foil the plans of the pathogen by seeking treatment. If he seeks treatment by taking an antibiotic, he might actually kill all of the pathogens and break the cycle. However, in case this host chooses a placebo, there's an option that, of course, it doesn't work. It's a placebo. If this is the case, eventually the host will decide to find a proper treatment. But in case a bacterium or another pathogen is able to detect the use of this placebo and respond to it accordingly, you will see that the placebo, the bacteria is able to transmit to a following generation because the host will be prevented from actually seeking the proper medical treatment. This is, of course, the preventing of eradication is, of course, a highly adaptive phenotype, and we will therefore have expected it to evolve repeatedly in many, many different human pathogens. The way this pathway works is actually twofold. First, the pathogen detects that he's infected a gullible host. With this detection and it's primed to look out for cues of the use of a placebo. Then it will sense the quorum, which is something that is very well established in science. So bacteria are repeatedly shown to be able to detect the size of their population and therefore adequately respond to the use of the placebo. And this use, of course, increases the gullibility of the host. Now, it is notoriously difficult to research the mechanisms of this because of the very aspecific nature of the response, which makes it very difficult to control for. But what we can look at is the output of the system as a whole, which is, of course, the host output or the internet. Humans are known to want to share their experiences, and of course the experience of being healed by acupuncture is no exception. And when they do this sharing the experience on the internet, we can actually measure that. So that's what we did. We looked for the combination of all kinds of human pathogens, both bacteria and viruses, as well as 6 different specifically chosen alternative therapies, and checked and scored for the total amount of search results that they gave. The results that you will see that we'll present in a minute will look as follows. So you have a species and then a bar graph indicating the number of responses that particular combination of pathogen and therapy gave. Now, of course, what we are looking for is if there's any particular bias that is provided by the biology of this pathogen to detect a certain type of therapy. And if we see that we put the threshold for this at 35%, so if the research results for one type of therapy is over 35% of the total search results for that pathogen, we call the pathogen a specialist, and we will color the bar as such. This is the... These are the results for bacteria. I will shortly present the results for viruses, but first for bacteria, what we see is very interesting. So first of all, we see that most bacteria actually are generalists. They tend to respond to a wide variety of, are reported to respond to a wide variety of therapies. Probably the ancestor of all bacteria was one that was particularly able to detect the signs of use of osteopathy. However, in the line to Bacilli and Clostridium, something happened that allowed that particular clade to be particularly tuned to the signs of aromatherapy, which is an interesting observation. And then there are a couple of further specialists, but because they're single ones, I will not address them right now. Looking at viruses and looking at the same thing, we find, first of all, that viruses seem to be much more able to detect sound therapy and yoga, especially single-strand RNA viruses seem to be very capable of detecting the signs of yoga use. Aromatherapy again pops up as something that double-stranded both DNA and RNA viruses are very able to detect. And of course, what I noticed first when I looked at this data is actually that the three therapies that seem to be most specialized in are actually probably therapies that or provide cues that could be engaged in by humans regardless of their infection status. And therefore, they would provide a very good clues for the bacteria that they have infected a gullible phenotype. For example, frequent and prolonged axis inversion or purposeless manipulations of muscles and joints, or the frequent respiratory intake of patchouli. So we assume from this that these are therapies that are much more playing a role much more strongly in the detection of the gullible phenotype. Now, in an upcoming study, we will go into much more detail about the biological significance of these species-specific detection biases. But for now, I'd like to leave you with one last observation, which is that the general response of all species that we found is actually quite cross-specific. So they seem to respond across the board to all kinds of different therapies, which is actually lies at the heart. So this cross-specificity lies at the heart of our hypothesis. And it not only explains the use of alternative medicine, but it also explains the quite baffling, very maladaptive trend of anti-vaccination movement. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for listening.
Dr. Barbara Breda. Robin?
Do you predict any mechanisms for viruses or bacteria in the detection of the ingestion of chicken soup?
That is a very interesting one. Actually, I would predict them, yes, absolutely. Given the ubiquity of the response, so that the fact that bacteria are able to respond to such a wide variety of cues, I would expect chicken soup to be absolutely one of them, yes.
So there's a common saying, which I'm sure you're aware of, that laughter is the best medicine. And I'm just curious if you think that there's any correlation to what I think may be an implication that alternative medicine is a joke.
I'm very glad that you bring that up, because what it does, that hypothesis actually provides an explanation for the increasing use of alternative medicine by people who don't actually believe in alternative medicine, which is very strange. So there's a very large segment of the population that takes this seriously, which of course would not fall under your particular hypothesis. But I guess that there's the fact that laughter is a good medicine provides room for expansion and provides an interface for those who don't yet believe that this is a solution to actually come in touch with the therapies and then have this particular response and be infected and respond positively and then, you know, spread the word and be influenced. Absolutely.
So it's all well and good that we're here in a science conference, you know, trying to get at the truth, but I think people are interested also in real-world interventions and what, you know, applied research. So do you think the NIH can do anything with your data? I mean, should they be encouraging like the worst therapies in the sense that the things that, you know, have come out only in recent decades, like, I don't know, alien healing that bacteria probably didn't have time to evolve to detecting?
Oh no, they should absolutely invest in research, but mostly in terms that the research in this will provide us with information about how bacteria are actually hijacking us. Because while this is a seemingly a good response, of course, those medications are actually not specific and they're not helping anyone. In fact, they're allowing our pathogens to reproduce. So maybe by either hijacking their ability to detect the use of these placebos, we might be able to eradicate the use of alternative medicine. That would be a good idea, yes.
So your current mode of transmission involves the internet. I wonder if you could speculate on how this could have evolved pre-internet days.
Oh, the internet is merely because that's an easy way for us to detect large-scale transmission of the idea, the meme that alternative medicine is a good idea. But pre-internet, of course, this would go as a mouth-to-mouth thing. So I've used acupuncture. My cold got better. You should try it too. That would be a conversation, and that could absolutely be sufficient to spread this malinformation.
I actually had a question. I was wondering if your gullibility hypothesis predicted a mutualistic or even symbiotic relationship between pathogens and Deepak Chopra.
Isn't it obvious?
Sorry. All right, Dr. Barbara Breda. All right, our fourth speaker is Michael Levine. He is currently a PhD candidate in the Physiology, Biophysics, and Systems Biology program at Weill Cornell Medical College of Cornell University. He works in the laboratory of Harold Weinstein, and I verified before that is not funded by Harvey Weinstein, where he studies protein allostery using computational and theoretical methods. Mr. Michael Levine.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with a legally mandated disclaimer. My presentation reflects my personal opinions, is not approved or authorized by Weill Cornell Medical College. All right, now an observation. Humans are smug. The definition of smugness that I'd like to use is from Merriam-Webster, and it is an often unjustified feeling of being pleased with oneself or one's situation or achievement. And I'd like to stress unjustified. So we all know someone who is smug. But in reality, that's all anecdotal. So what I'd like to show is that statistically, we're all smug. So I'm going to start with the Dunning-Kruger effect. So in 1999, Kruger and Dunning did a study where they asked the subjects to take cognitive tasks and then rate their perceived ability compared to others who took the task. Now what they found is that nearly everyone overestimated their ability. And the worse you were at the task, the more you overestimated it. And they also noticed a second effect, and that is that even at the bottom quartile, people believed that they were above average. And this is the well-known better than average effect. Given almost any positive attribute, people believe they are better than the average. So clearly people are smug, but we really come now to the question of the night. Is there an evolutionary drive towards smugness? So I'd like to propose that there is. The smug hypothesis. Humans have evolved to be smug because smug parents have more successful offspring. Now, I think the proposition appears almost entirely reasonable and immediately obvious, but I'd like to get into the data that really supports this hypothesis. So first, we start with a study from 1981 by Smith and Greenberg, who found that being self-aware was positively correlated with being depressed. Now, it wasn't just your personal awareness, but also your awareness in relation to others. And I'd like to point out at the bottom of this table the statistics. As you can see, all the p-values are less than 0.05. This is statistically significant and thus true. But it's possible that being depressed does not have that big of an effect on reproductive success. But I think there's really a second component. Now, it's been well known that when parents are depressed, their children have higher risk for many developmental and mental health problems. And this is part of the reason why it's very important to treat postpartum depression. But I think this also gives smug parents a huge advantage in raising their children. This leads me to propose the cycle of smugness. So at some point in human history, the humans acquired the smug gene. Those smug adults reproduced, and their offspring had a decreased risk compared to the population average, and that led them to be more fit, and thus the number of high-quality smug mates increased. Now, obviously, they reproduced, and this cycle caused the number of smug individuals to raise drastically. Now, like any good theoretician, I'm now going to present various predictions to demonstrate the vast explanatory power of the smug hypothesis. So, the first prediction. Parents will be smug. So it's not sufficient for people to be smug. This hypothesis predicts that, in particular, parents will be smug. So let's look at some data. The first data I took from babycenter.com. So they asked, do you believe your child is academically gifted? Now, the 63,000 people who participated, 72% said yes. Now, this is at odds with estimates that 5% of children are academically gifted. But this could be sampling bias. Perhaps these parents do have academically gifted children, or perhaps this is where all the smug parents hang out. But a 2010 study by the US government found that 97% of parents believe their children are well behaved. If you've ever been in a grocery store or on an airplane, you know this can't be true. And the authors did not believe this to be true either. They suggested that parents weren't lying, but they honestly believed their children were well behaved. They had an unjustified belief in their achievement as parents, aka they were smug. So clearly parents are smug, but perhaps there's a more interesting question. What behaviors have we evolved to increase our smugness? How do we maintain this unjustified belief about ourselves and others? Now, in a community, we communicate and exchange information, and by doing this, we come to a mutual understanding of our shared reality and our shared existence. Now, if in order to be smug, you need to maintain your own unjustified feelings, so what would you do? Well, I would suggest that you would just not listen. So prediction 2 is that people will actively avoid information that challenges their unjustified beliefs. So what I'd like to show you is modern evidence of this adaptation. So what I did is I went to Alexa.com, which ranks websites by overall internet traffic. So if you look at the top websites on this list, what we find is that there's a common motif. They all allow the users to curate the content so they can only see what they'd like to see, either automatically or manually. So let's look at number 3, YouTube. On YouTube, you can post lengthy videos detailing your opinions and then disable the comments. It's not until number 6 we find Wikipedia, the world's largest source of human knowledge. So clearly, people prefer sites where they can curate their exposure to information. Now, there are millions of more predictions this theory makes and terabytes of more data to support it, but for the sake of time, I'd like to skip to the conclusions. So conclusion 1, humans have evolved to be smug because when you're smug, your kids are better. Conclusion 2, parents are especially smug. And I think that this conclusion actually solves a lot of arguments that teenagers have. And then finally, I think the most important finding of this study is that the main function of the internet is to increase human smugness. So while I personally believe I've done an incredible job explaining this theory to you, if any doubt remains, I'm sure that I can clear it up during the questions. Thank you.
Michael Levine.
So I'm sure you're familiar with the Red Queen hypothesis. Running as fast as you can in order to stay in place. In biology, you have to adopt very advantageous traits. You have to run faster. You have to run faster to catch your prey, but then your prey has to run faster to run away from the predator. Do you think that since there's nothing to stop the spread of smugness, that we're going to run into some sort of Red Queen thing where people will just become more and more smug, but then where is the future leading us to exactly? Yes, peak smugness. Is there?
So I believe there could be the risk of a smug-pocalypse. So this situation was once described in a great dystopian work. It was a South Park episode where they proposed that one day LA could become so smug that it would cause a natural disaster. I believe this was a very accurate prediction.
So your model postulated the evolution of a smug gene. I'm wondering what evidence you have it's genetically encoded instead of culturally inherited.
Yeah, so I think there could be a whole smugome of smug factors. So it could be genetic, epigenetic. It could also be by the form of memes. Now, as I suggested, the internet is a very good way to increase your smugness. It is also an incredibly good way to transmit memes. I don't believe that is a coincidence. So I think that actually, because it's so important for us to be smug, we've developed many, many traits to be smug, and it would actually be interesting to dissect all of them.
So you mainly focused on the parents, basically leading to more academically gifted children. I was wondering if there was also implications for professors, I would argue that all professors, or at least 72% of professors, would believe themselves to be great professors, and therefore, obviously, the students would have learned all the knowledge effectively, so therefore, grade inflation is an evolutionary development.
So I think grade inflation could definitely be a way of recognizing smugness. However, from what I know about MIT, there's quite a bit of grade deflation, so I think that might be in conflict with that.
You speak about smugness among parents. Would you therefore say that smugness among the child-free is a spandrel of sorts?
Yeah, I think that smugness, as children, we are smug. All children are smug. But it might be just anticipation of being older. Although I'm sure there's many benefits of being a smug child. For instance, you generally become the leader of the group. So there's probably a lot of reasons why children would also be smug, but I think the only evidence that I've seen is that it affects them at the level of parents, and because it's the only evidence I've seen, I have to conclude that I'm right.
Michael Levine. All right, our next speaker is Justin Werfel, Dr. Justin Werfel, who has just received his PhD from MIT. You guys got it this time. And is a research scientist in bio-inspired robotics at Harvard. Please welcome Dr. Justin Werfel.
Thank you. So tonight, I'd like to share with you my research into a simple but fundamental question. Why are bugs disgusting? This is actually kind of a profound question, right? I mean, you hear bug, the typical reaction is yuck, but that doesn't make any sense. Because as you all know, as you heard earlier this evening, we evolved as insectivores, right? This goes back to the very earliest primates, which were insectivores. Many primates today are almost exclusively insectivores. So this is our evolutionary heritage. There are actually linguistic relics of this heritage even today. So why is it that in our modern industrial society, insects are not widely eaten, despite the many strong health and environmental benefits it would provide? Where did this very much ahistoric feeling of disgust come from? The answer is in the history of human population growth. Throughout the bulk of evolutionary history, mammalian insectivores were not an ecologically dominant factor. But over millennia, a tremendous amount of other biomass has been replaced by humans. So there's been this tremendous shift from all of this formerly dominant biomass that was supported by things like grasses and other sources, to instead a tremendous predatory pressure on insects. And in particular, from a single predator. So there's not even a diversity of predation. So the natural result is a correspondingly strong evolutionary pressure on insects to evolve an appearance that specifically evokes a disgust response in what's become now their overwhelmingly most significant predator as a defensive measure. Good. So, like all good theories, this one makes predictions. Most immediately, it says that modern bugs should be more disgusting than ancient ones. And indeed, this is easy to verify. I think we can all agree that modern bugs tend to inspire feelings of revulsion, whereas ancient ones, much less so. But we can say more. Because of the shape of the human population growth curve, with this explosion really in recent history, you can actually see strong effects on insect appearance even just within the last century or two. One way you can see that is it's reflected in changing human attitudes during that time. For instance, if you look at representative book titles over the decades. The shift in attitude here is very clear, driven, as I say, by this underlying change in insect appearance. And of course, this trend continued, and in other media. And it persists up to the present day. Now, this is indirect evidence, right? But we can do this rigorously and quantitatively. So in order to do that, I collected representative images of bugs, roughly one per decade over the last 230 so years. And I conducted a study in which I presented experimental subjects with these images in randomized order and asked them to rate each one on a scale from 0 to 10 according to how disgusting they found it. And here are the results. Thank you. And just to be clear, these are the actual results of that actual study. This is an incredibly powerful and consistent trend. Now, things actually get even more interesting. If we look at the actual human population growth curve, it's actually not that great a fit, right? I mean, there's a high correlation, but the shape of the curve doesn't match the best fit line for the data. And the reason for that is that actually the picture is a little bit more complicated. It's not just the number of humans that's driving this change in insect appearance. If that were the only factor, you'd expect these two curves to be a much closer match. What's also important is the human response to insect appearance, which is also changing. Because we're experiencing our own pressures of increasing population and decreasing food availability, and there exists this terrific available resource. And the obstacle to our using it, of course, is obvious, right? I mean, the thought of eating bugs is repulsive. But we are now starting to turn the full weight of human ingenuity upon that problem. Because if there's one thing that humans are really good at, if a resource exists, no matter how inaccessible, we will find a way to exploit it. And so we're now seeing an increasing number of companies that are working to bring insects into our daily diets as a regular and acceptable component. Just a few weeks ago was the first North American conference on entomophagy. A new peer-reviewed scholarly journal starts publication next year. So all of this is happening. Okay? And at the same time, the human population keeps increasing, right? It's projected to increase well past the end of the century. And so there's this evolutionary arms race going on in which the stakes of the tug of war keep increasing. Right? So this is precisely the Red Queen situation that Tomer described earlier. You've got, in this case, an arms race between bugs to keep getting more disgusting and humans to keep overcoming that. So to predict the future of this arms race, I constructed a simple coevolutionary model to take into account changes in both the appearance of bugs and the human response. Now, unfortunately, time doesn't permit me to discuss the mechanics of the model in full detail. But I'll share with you the results. And the model almost precisely captures the observed empirical trend. So, among other things, that means that we can, with high confidence, make quantitative predictions about the future, right? We can say numerically just how bad things are going to get as a function of time. And so I will close with an artist's conception, based on this model, of the kind of thing that we can conservatively look forward to encountering on a daily basis just a few short decades from now.
Dr. Justin Weffel. Questions?
So I realize that you all didn't get to discuss your research beforehand, but in light of Emma's presentation earlier, are you now open to revising your hypothesis to suggest that bugs are not evolving necessarily to become more disgusting, but simply to become less boring?
I like that idea very much, and I think it deserves further study. My guess is that that's not going to be the primary mechanism driving the evolution of their appearance. As we saw from the data earlier this evening, that's not the primary source of protein for hunter-gatherer societies, for instance. So I think it's likely to be a secondary effect.
Based on your work, would you say that it's possible for the metamorphosis of caterpillars into butterflies to be an evolutionary development as acknowledgement of their own hideousness?
When you say acknowledgement of their own hideousness, I feel like that's getting to speculation about kind of the intellectual life of, and I think that goes beyond the scope of the work.
Self-selection.
As someone who's interested in computational modeling, could you explain further why K5 was 2.67? I'm sorry, 4.9, I'm sorry.
So I'll say a few words about the structure of this model. So, you know, as you can see at a glance, right? Take the first equation. The disgustingness is changing over time according to the existing level of disgustingness, right? And here I'm assuming that there's going to be some cost, metabolic or otherwise, to maintaining disgustingness that would otherwise vanish in the absence of the pressure. There's, you know, some driving force from the human population by hypothesis. And I have no reason to think that that's linear, right? So I left that as a free parameter. And then similarly, there's some driving force from the human response, again, you know, as I described by hypothesis. And similarly, that's a free parameter to see what it turns out to be. And the result turns out to be that it goes to the 2.5 power. And you saw how well that captured the shear force. Right. I'm not sure that I can offer you a very satisfying intuition for why that precise value, but basically it's more than linear. You know, that has to do with this increasing, you know, these increasing stakes. The better people get at overcoming the defense, the harder the bugs have to work to overcome it.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I was wondering if in your very careful studies you detected any correlation between sort of the disgustingness in appearance and the deliciousness in taste. In other words, can we look forward to a bacon bug in the future?
I think I speak for all of us when I say, I sure hope so.
All right, Dr. Justin Ruffel. All right, it is time for our final presentation. Next up is Michael Anderson. He is a First Amendment lawyer who scored a 5 on his biology AP exam. Please welcome Michael Anderson.
As the human male ages, we begin to see a donut-shaped belt of tissue around the midsection. This is known to science as the spare tire or the abdominal torus. Now, this is an evolutionary puzzle because unlike the human female, the human male has absolutely no reproductive excuse for this trait at all. Now, classical evolutionary theory tries to explain this as a strategic food reserve. The argument being that as older men lose the ability to hunt, they adapt by storing nutrients in a fat reservoir around their waistline. And this is a very plausible theory, but for one problem. It's empirically falsified. You see, the core prediction of the classical model is that under conditions of starvation or stress, the donut will do its job and release all these stored nutrients to be consumed, which would mean that the donut will deplete and vanish. And the data do not bear this out. Settle down, this is science. Now, when we measure the volume of the torus, looking at the differential between stressed and unstressed conditions, we find that the delta is 0. That is, no matter how much aerobic activity, no matter how much calorie deprivation, even both at the same time, it makes no difference. It never, ever goes away. And so we must reject the nutritional model as a fantasy and find a more convincing explanation. Now, when we go to find the prehistoric Genesis, the donut Adam, we find that he must have been pretty lonely, because very few hunter-gatherers actually lived to middle age. In the Neolithic era, this gene is dormant, and all the selection pressure is about the ability to hunt. We reward speed and strength and washboard abdominal muscles. So when they painted themselves as stick figures, it's not because they were bad artists. It's that was probably what they looked like. Now, all of this changes about 10,000 years ago when humans start to settle on the alluvial floodplains of major river systems like the Nile, the Indus Valley, like Mesopotamia. Now here, the selection pressure changes. It's no longer about the ability to hunt food. It's about the ability to survive the catastrophic annual river floods that make that food possible. Wait for it. And it's here that the abdominal bulge becomes prominent, which dictates my hypothesis that this is a flotation device. The entire reason why our species was able to survive in early river civilizations. Now, I know that there are some of you who will object that, well, come on, they could have gotten into boats. Okay, that kind of Thor Heyerdahl fantasy ignores that it's projecting technology too far back on the evolutionary timeline. So, let's look at the probability function at the beginning of the Bronze Age. If we let P0 stand for the probability that you can get safely into a boat before you drown in the river flood, well, that means that in only a few days, and maybe as little as 15 minutes, you're gonna have to come up with the lumber, the tools, and someone that knows how to use them. Wait for it. All while the river water is steadily rising around your waist, slowing you down, which can be expressed in a differential equation that I'll put in the footnote. And it's not good enough, even if you already have a boat, in a time when boats are a new thing. Because unless the technology has spread so far that everybody's got a boat, you're going to be a victim of intraspecies competition from the boat thieves who live next door. And the point is that the value of P0 is simply not going to be high enough to assure survival for centuries, maybe millennia after the first river settlement. And so human beings during this early transition period are going to have to rely on more low-tech survival strategies. So, say you're a Sumerian peasant in 4000 BC, and the floodwaters of the Euphrates are rising around your ankles. Do you really spend the last 15 minutes of your life splashing around trying to cut down a palm tree? No, you don't. You grab Dad and you hold on to those handles for dear life. And if you doubt the math, just look at the creation myths of every early civilization. They all feature a middle-aged man who saves his family from a flood. The ancient Hebrew word for ark, teba, does not mean boat. It means chest or box, like the Ark of the Covenant, which means that the original meaning of Noah's Ark is Dad's trunk. And we see the abdominal bulge in Gilgamesh, in Vishnu, in Greek mythology, in Beowulf, in the river myths of the Incas and the Han Chinese, all of which is overwhelming evidence that the patriarchies of the early Bronze Age were just a cover for the flotational power of middle-aged belly fat. Now, that was then, and this is now. And now we have boats and dams and bridges. And now it seems that middle-aged men are high and dry, and the flotational patriarchy is a thing of the past. Or is it? You see, this raises a disturbing interpretation of global warming. Wait for it. You see, men over 50 are only 10% of the world population, but they are 97% of the executives of fossil fuel-burning corporations. And when you look at a list of all the major greenhouse gas producing activities, from deforestation to the use of lighter fluid on outdoor barbecues, you find that men over 50 are overrepresented by several standard deviations, so that we can say with 5 sigma confidence that middle-aged men are the ones who are melting the ice caps. Oh, please be patient. Now, why would we do this? Evolutionary biology gives us the answer. To restore the ancient glory of our adaptive life preservers Because it's not that we want to destroy the ecosystem, but a guy wants to feel needed again.
Michael Anderson. Questions?
Thank you for thank you for the scientific insight into my personal evolutionary future. I'm curious if an incidental implication of your work is that the best way for me to maintain my six-pack abs is to buy a boat.
Well, what this predicts is that you may not want the boat soon.
Really more of an observation than a question, but as somebody who's interested in both evolution and language and the deep origin of human mythology, perhaps the great success of one of our local snack chains has to do then with the profound evolutionary implications of the phrase Dunkin' Donuts.
So in modern times, there's another outgrowth, and that is the beer gut. I'm wondering if there's any interactive or epistatic interaction with the spare tire and what that means for the future of both.
Well, I think that you can identify alcoholism as a coping mechanism for men who feel that their place in the patriarchy has been eliminated. But in the future, it will not be a beer gut. It will go back to being the glory that existed in Mesopotamia. That is,
So, assuming we all think that global warming is a bad thing, what should be done with them?
virtual reality comes to mind. Simply an immersive, interactive video experience that allows middle-aged men to feel that they're still, that they're still the kings of the early Bronze Age.
All right, Michael Anderson, everybody. Okay, we have come to the end of our presentations. The judges are going to begin their self-deliberations, and after that there will be tallying. And while they're doing that, we are going to do the bit of the scoring that you get to participate in. So, the audience gets a vote. Whichever one you judge to be the best will get some number of points. I forget which, but you get a vote in the winner. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to read through each of the talks so you can remember what the talks were about. So don't cheer this round through, but just so you remember the topics. Our first talk was Emma Cowell with yawning as insect consumption, Kevin Jung as beards as food storage, Barbara Vrede as bacterial adaptation and the placebo effect, Michael Levine with adaptive smugness in humans, Justin Werfel with adaptive hideousness in insects, and Michael Anderson with the toroidal middle-aged man. So, take one more moment, decide which one you think is the best, and when I call that one, you are going to cheer. And because this is a science conference, we are going to do this scientifically with a decibel meter. So, all right. Who believes the best talk was Emma Cowell yawning as insect consumption? And Kevin Jung with beards as food storage. Barbara Vrida with bacterial adaptation and the placebo effect. Michael Levine, adaptive smugness in humans. I'm growing up. Justin Werfel, adaptive hideousness in insects. And Michael Anderson, the toroidal middle-aged man. That was nearly a three-way tie, but the winner for that one is Michael Anderson. All right.
I should just say it was a tie vote for the audience vote.
Oh.
And it came down that way.
All right.
It's very tight though. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh, right. There was one. So we're about to announce the winner. We would like to remind you that there will be a signing after the show, just after you walk out the doors with Zach here. All right. Where's the suitcase?
Oh.
Zach, should I say who the tie was with?
Yeah.
Okay. So in second place by a hair's breadth was Emma Cowell with Insect Yawning. And in first place, this year's champion of the Festival of Bad Ad Hoc Hypotheses, Michael Anderson. You can say a few words if you'd like.
Really? Do I have to?
You don't have to.
Wow. Thank you. I'd be interested to see what satire is going to do for other disciplines. You know, the stand-up physics conference. That's what I want to see. Thanks.
All right, Michael Anderson. And actually, Michael, you're going to come. All right, actually, Michael, we're going to have you come right back up because I'd like to invite all of our speakers up here on stage so we can thank them once again for their extraordinary presentations. Big thank you to all of our speakers. All right, thank you all. I'd also like to have you all thank our judges for judging here tonight. Thank you for your service to Bonness. All right, and if I could get you all to clear the way. Thank you all for coming. We're going to do a few thank yous before we go, and we're going to start this off with a short video about the making of the prize. So that prize was printed out by the wonderful students of the Black Pine Circle Maker Club. A huge thank you to them and to Christine Mitko for producing the prize. I would also like to thank Christina Shu, Hadassah Head, David Sloan Wilson, Amanda Rossi, Michael Johnson, Rick Karneski, Kelly Wienersmith, Kishore Hari, Eric and Marty Dermain, Nicole Teeny, Badger, Kyle Horseman, Andrea Surumi, Erica Liu, and the LSC. And finally, a big thank you to Phyllis Weiner, who is watching Zach and Kelly's baby tonight back in California. Thank you to him. And finally, thank you all so much for coming.